Father Dioscanus, thank you so much for the invitation to be with you and the two parishes this evening. The title of my reflection tonight is The Redeemed Vision, the Grace, Imagination, and the Eucharist. And so the reflection will be in two parts. First, understanding how our gaze upon the Eucharist is not only how we see with our eyes, but also how our interior vision, our imagination, is formed to see the Eucharist in faith. So as Catholics, we are blessed with deep traditions of silence, quiet, and stillness, as well as traditions in sacred art, music, the traditions of using our bodies in prayer, kneeling, standing, genuflecting. But at times, we all struggle with focusing at prayer, with periods of recollection. And perhaps a reason, not the only reason, but maybe a reason, is that the struggle in encountering Christ is that a person's imagination, that interior faculty that aids the intellect, might be hindered in its development. It might not be as supple as it once had. Maybe we're not able to receive images as we used to. So tonight, I would like to consider how the imagination may affect a person's faith formation, especially within liturgical and sacramental celebrations, and how the imagination formed in grace can assist us in encountering Christ in the Eucharist. You may have heard the terms Catholic imagination or sacramental imagination, and these terms are used to describe sort of the Catholic way of looking at things, especially in reference to the creative arts. And sometimes you'll hear that in terms of like reading J.R.R. Tolkien, The Lord of the Rings, or the Narnia Chronicles, that people will say this is sort of the Catholic vision, the Catholic way. There's also another way to look at the imagination. And I had the opportunity to sort of encounter and discover the works of an English Dominican father whose name was Conrad Peppler. And he proposed back in the 1940s, and he was really very prophetic in what he saw in terms of education and in the media, as was known in the 1940s, but that the imagination needed training. And he thought it needed in training in terms of the anthropology of understanding the human person, according to St. Thomas Aquinas. So the entire person, body and soul, the mind and its faculties, needed to be trained in the imagination. And that all begins with how our physical senses are stimulated. And that is key for us to understand that relationship between the visible and the invisible into the supernatural life. So Conrad Peppler, when he was thinking about this and writing about this, he said, the first thing we encounter is the world. You know, you desire what you see, you smell, you taste, you touch. And from these physical senses being inspired, you're learning to look for what is real, but also to desire what is beyond. So if you take something, like, do you have an orange-flavored drink, okay, soda, or do you eat a real orange? Do you have a candle that is scented to be ocean-scented, or do you go to the real ocean? And so that's what he's saying, is that these things that are presented our senses, there is a greater something beyond, and that we're not always going to be satisfied with what we have physically present. So he's always looking for that connection between what is visible, what we can sense with the five senses, to what is invisible. And this is a key connection between our faith and sacramental life. And he in particular looked to a passage from St. Paul to the Romans. And St. Paul wrote, "Ever since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes of eternal power and divinity have been able to be understood and perceived in what he has made. So whatever God has made, okay, we have been able to perceive this, understand that he has made it, but also it's drawing us on. And Comrade Pepper looked at the Mass part, the preface of the Mass for Christmas, which reads, "While we know God in visible things, we are thus wrapped into the love of invisible things." The Incarnation is, in this sense, the greatest expression of the inward movement of the liturgy. And so just as when we have the parents who love their child, in there the parents are expressing their love, but they're also modeling the love of the Father, a Marian devotion, Marian love to each other and to their children. So this ability to see the invisible is in part what the formation of the imagination tells, that what we receive from the sacramental life is the ability to discern what is real, not according to worldly standards. As Father mentioned, it looks like a piece of bread, it's round, but it's Jesus Christ, body, soul, blood, and divinity. And so we're beginning then to see in the light of the Incarnation. Now, Comrade Pepler also coined the term called poet apostle. And what he meant by being a poet apostle, he's describing a person who's in training or forming his creative imagination. And if you're in this formation, okay, of training or forming your imagination, you're not encountering anything that's purely natural, okay? Because you're seeing all things in relation to the redemption. You're understanding that Christ is the head of man and the whole universe, so that everything that speaks to you of Christ and the work of Christ, if you will, just like on stationery, if you hold the stationery up to the light, you have the watermark, okay? Or we look at animals who are able to imprint their young, okay? And in that sense, the poet apostle is able to see creation as, in a sense, the heartbeat of Christ, okay? And so all those things that we establish in the liberal arts, in our Catholic traditions, the symbols, the traditions, even those that may be pre-Christian, like the Greek myths, different types of architecture, different types of music, all these can be redeemed by the imagination because they're being redeemed by Christ, purifying them and integrating them into the life of the resurrection. So this redeemed vision, this ability to gaze upon the cosmos, upon the world, in light of the resurrection, it's not just a level of perception. A few years ago, they always used to have those, it would be a picture that was made of all these little dots, and you're supposed to stare at it, and then after a few minutes, you were able to see like an image, okay? So it's not something like you're looking at a change of perception, but your redeemed vision is encountering the mystery of God's providential creation. And so if we begin, I love before feast days, especially meditating on the different parts of the Mass. And there's the preface of the Mass for All Saints. And it proclaims and urges the faithful to seek the heavenly Jerusalem. It reads, "Towards her we eagerly hasten as pilgrims advancing by faith, rejoicing in the glory bestowed upon those exalted members of the Church." So here, eagerly hastening towards her. We're pilgrims advancing by faith, rejoicing in the glory. And so this is what we're being called to be seeing this redeemed vision as the more and more that we spend time with the Eucharist, spend time at Mass. So for our imagination, Yes, we see wheat and grapes. Okay, then we can understand bread and wine. But then we go beyond to understand the Eucharist, the body and blood of Jesus Christ. So what Papler is encouraging is this idea of the poet apostle viewing all of redemption or creation as part of the redemption, is he almost says that you begin to have the imagination of Christ. He said Christ himself was the greatest poet and the apostle. And the imagination in the spirit of grace is one that we can begin to be trained for and begin to adopt. And so this wholeness of vision, from the visible to the invisible, to the earthly and the heavenly, to the physical and spiritual, is the end of the formation of the imagination, to really be able to see with the imagination of Christ. Now, key to this is the formation of the imagination has to start with those physical senses. And so important are nature experiences. And, so it's exploring the woods, beaches, and meadows are important to the formation of the imagination. Reading Scripture, delving into Scripture, okay, are all part of preparing this imagination. And the Catechism of the Catholic Church actually has a caution for people who don't have this receptivity. The Catechism of the Catholic Church reads that if there's a person who's indifferent to the material cosmos, the incredible world of nature, he or she may be confounded in their ability to know how to read the traces of its creator. Okay, so if we're not involved in nature, if we're not experiencing the beauty of imagination, we're not going to be able to see, if you will, that watermark of Christ, the heartbeat of Christ in creation. We're going to grapple with identifying or interpreting symbolic words and images of the sacramental and liturgical life. So the imagination, which is always assisting the intellect, is this bridge from the natural world to the supernatural world. And so we have to really stock our imaginations with natural images. Because if so much of the sacraments, the oil, the water, the touch, it's going to be based on those first experiences of the physical senses. And the more that we can appreciate the physical world, the natural world, we then become more and more open to the spiritual world, the sacramental world. Now, when Papler was writing in the 70 years ago, in one of his passages, he said the optimum formation of the imagination occurs in the liturgy, particularly at Mass. And if we consider the richness of the Catholic tradition of music, art, architecture, that enhances liturgical prayer and the celebration of the sacraments, the Catechism also encourages what it refers to as the harmony of signs, that there's a cultural richness of the people of God who celebrate the sacraments. And so the liturgical worship uses symbolic objects that can stimulate our senses, the incense, and primes our imagination to what is sacred, okay, by a gradual information. And so how important it is in catechesis to explain why the colors. Why is it at benediction we sing certain songs, hymns in Latin that are familiar around the world? Why is it that we have special devotions around the May with Mary with the crowning of the Blessed Virgin, in October with the Rosary, Advent calendars, Advent wreaths? All these should be present in helping to form the imagination, especially this liturgical imagination. And because what he expresses, what will happen over time is that when your imagination becomes trained in the liturgy, all these things are happening in your mind. The sights and sounds of worship begin to flood into your imagination. Okay? And so when we have those lulls, those moments of quiet, okay, the imagination being formed at the Mass begins to have its influence on what we're doing during the day, the passing sights and the passing sounds of the day. And so the importance, too, of having leisure time, okay, of where we're putting time aside for relaxation, for quiet by ourselves or with our families. Questioning, how much time do we spend with different types of entertainment or social media? Now, at Mount de Sales recently, the Christmas present for the faculty and staff, and actually for the entire girls, was a subscription to the Hallow app. And so many of the faculty and staff and students have been using the Hallow app. And Monday, I went with some of the students and faculty to the Maryland March for Life. And on the bus, one of our teachers said, "It has transformed my life." She said, "I used to say the rosary." She said, "Now I say the rosary every day with Mark Wahlberg." But some will talk about the sacred music, the praise and worship music they have. So I don't necessarily want a commercial for Hallow, but it's that time. That's what they're doing. They're forming their imagination by what they're spending their time with. So the graced imagination is not just the ability to look in an art print and say, aha, this means such and such, and symbolically, but it should be a spiritual and practical adaptation that are every day that we're enlivening and nourishing our imagination in some way. And especially if we're able to participate in 40 hours in the silence of adoration with praise and worship music, but also different Eucharistic celebrations and feasts through the year. Now, all this will vary from person to person, but when you have been living with the grace imagination, you're involved in the liturgy in a different way. It begins to have different meaning to you, a different depth begins to come into your mind and heart. And so with an opportunity, as we have this evening with 40 hours and through this weekend, it's adoration, it's benediction. We're stimulating all our senses. One of I came across a few years ago some jottings, and they really were jottings, just sort of notes, by St. John Henry Newman. And he was the great Anglican clergyman who forsake his past. And really, when he became a Catholic, he was given nothing, okay? He didn't even have a place to live. And the Archdiocese of Birmingham in England opened up a residence that they had, and he was able to move there. And eventually he was confirmed, and he became a Catholic priest. And it wasn't maybe within 10 years or so of his ordination as a Catholic priest, he was giving a parish mission on a Sunday during the octave of Corpus Christi. And in his writings, and it's not even like a printed sermon, it was just sort of notes that they found afterwards that they published. But in here, in his notes, he was writing about Corpus Christi and said, "There is no feast, no season in the whole year that is so intimately connected with our religious life or shows more wonderfully what Christianity is." Okay, no other feast. That's the Feast of Corpus Christi, and to think this is what he became a Catholic to proclaim. And he went on to talk a little bit about more. What does this mean? Okay, to be intimately connected with our religious life. He said, none of us have seen or heard or even heard those who saw anyone who saw Jesus. Okay? So just as we may have a connection, we look at old photographs and we're like, okay, this is great grandma, this is, we're looking for that connection in old photographs, or maybe even like old scratchy recordings, or we hear the stories at Thanksgiving, great-grandfather seeing a president campaigning when he was a child. We're looking always for these connections. Whenever I went downtown Chicago with my parents, sometimes if we were going to Lincoln Park, we passed over the Chicago River, and my father would always say, and that bridge over there, when I was in third grade, we came from school to FDR, was here himself, to dedicate. It was a connection that we have. But Numa was saying, none of us have that connection with Jesus. No one that we know ever saw him or heard him. Okay? So he's looking that there is some desire in our hearts to know the historical past, to know the historical event. And he said, Jesus preaching and healing, those events do remain in the past. We have the gospel accounts, but again, we don't know anyone who witnessed this. But what he emphasizes is that the Eucharist transcends time. Okay? And that Christ's resurrection counteracts time in the world. That Christ's presence in the Blessed Sacrament is not in the past. And that is what makes devotion in our lives. It's the life of the religion. We are brought into the unseen world. We are brought into the unseen world. And this is what I think is amazing with Newman suggests. It's through the Eucharist that the time, okay, we can sort of transcend that. And I think it's such an important meditation point, especially those who are grieving, those we have who have gone before us, to know that there's this connection in the unseen world. And so when we participate at Mass, we receive the Eucharist. When we are able to adore the Lord at 40 hours, we are entering into this unseen world that transcends space and time. Now, Mount de Sales, we have a 7 o'clock morning Mass, and that's chiefly for the sisters to be able to go to Mass every day. But we do have some students and faculty and staff who come. Some of the girls are coming in from Severna Park. Others say, they're leaving their house like at 6:20 in the morning or earlier to come to Mass. Now, I can understand that, the girls are part of the school. What's been sort of amazing to us is that there are about 10 young men who are from Mount St. Joe's, and they're coming for, 16, 17, 18-year-old boys. I have 3 brothers, and when they were 16, 17, 18, this is what you heard. Yeah, good. Okay. But these young men are coming to attend Mass several times a week. Okay, and so it's sometimes there's one, but a couple days you'll have about 10 of them who are coming, and there is a reason why they're coming time and time again, and I think they're experiencing the sense of a time is they're able to transcend and able to go into this unseen world, and it's. Well, a couple of them do have girlfriends there, but there is such a great beauty of seeing them. Now, I think this idea of time and eternity may not have been fully fathomed when we speak about the imagination. But again, it's in the Catechism when I began to read about this a little bit more. There's a section in the Catechism on the Sacraments, and it contains a passage from St. Thomas Aquinas, which unveils the sacramental mystery of past, present, and future. The Catechism reads, "Therefore, a sacrament is a sign that commemorates what precedes it, Christ's passion, demonstrates what is accomplished in us through Christ's passion, grace, and prefigures what passion pledges to us, future glory." And that's for all the sacraments. All the sacraments commemorate, demonstrates, and prefigures. So it's extending of a frame to sound the depths of the past and the present and the future. And so for a few months, just to look at each of these words, to see how during adoration and celebration of the Mass, are we able to see how the sacrament commemorates, demonstrates, and prefigures. Well, if we commemorate, even on a natural level, we celebrate an anniversary, a historical event. This could be anything from 4th of July to Thanksgiving. But the liturgical year is tilled with an annual remembrance of events. Christmas, Saint's Feast Day, the year culminating in the Paschal Triduum, which we'll be celebrating in a few weeks, the source and summit of the liturgical year. And in the daily celebration, the Eucharist, the Passion is remembered not only as a historical event, but also as this commemoration, extending to a remembrance of graces and mercy in this sacred time. That communal praise, when we praise together, when we praise in song, refreshes our memories that can be aired out, shaken out, refreshed, but not suppressed. To demonstrate not only conveys the present time, the here and now, but also that liturgical today, as expressed in the letter to the Hebrews. Encourage yourselves daily while it is still today. This today allows us to rise from the drudgery of the here and now to experience the fullness of time. Why is it that people come to daily Mass? It's experience of the today, of the fullness of time. There's a very interesting newly ordained bishop, Bishop Eric Varden, and he's almost, when you hear a little bit about your past, you're like, he can't be real. Somebody had to make this character up. But he was born in Norway to a nominal Lutheran family, didn't really practice. He verged on agnosticism, atheism. And as a young man, then went to England to study. And when he's at Cambridge in graduate studies, he converts to the Catholic faith. After more studies, and he's a fellow at the university, he discerns a vocation to the Cistercians. And so he enters and becomes a Cistercian monk. And then after a few years, he's elected abbot. He was only abbot maybe a couple of years, and then he was asked to become bishop in Norway. And the diocese that he's bishop of has not had a bishop in 10 years. Okay, so 10 years. So he's coming in, trying to establish catechesis, and the Scandinavian church they don't have the same sense of Sunday Mass attendance or the sacrament of confession. He is really back into mission territory, trying to evangelize and enliven the church. He has a wonderful website where he has postings, and he's also published several books. And his first book he published a few years ago is entitled The Shattering of Loneliness. It's a very dense book. I think I've had to read it 3 or 4 times just to get a little glimmer of what he's presenting. But he has this compelling for us not just to look back to remember, but also to look forward in eternity. And I think this is when we look at how is the sacraments prefigured, okay? It's not just for the here and now, but looking for the pledge of future glory. We're not scurrying to earn or to add up points of an arduous task, but trying to anticipate the future that's given to us from above. And that's why it's so beautiful in the season of Advent. We're preparing for the Lord's coming, but it's not the future of our own making. Okay? It's what we're able to receive. And so coming for this transcending of time, Bishop Varden, and this quotation of his, I keep pondering over and over. He said, to remember, really remember, is to slip our moorings. So if we're on a boat, to slip our moorings and set sail on the open sea, with all that entails of peril and exhilaration. And I think this image that he has of slipping our moorings and setting out on the open sea is akin to what Newman spoke about the unseen world. And I think this is what the adventure of the sacramental life is about, is how we encounter Christ in the mystery of faith. And so how the church prepares us with beautiful liturgical art, sacred music, scripture, and the sacraments, we are able to enter this harmony of the signs, as the Catechism states, the harmony of signs of celebration, so that the mystery encounter in the sacraments, in adoration, is imprinted in our heart's memory. And then it's expressed in the new life of our faithful. So the imprinting of the heart's memory, the formation of the graced imagination, is expressed in the new life of the faithful. And I think it's part of this echo, the ebb and flow, the open sea, the unseen world, beginning with natural experiences, blessed by grace, blessed by the blood of Christ. We are able to experience in the natural world, in our daily tasks, in the drudgery of our daily tasks, that we are able to experience with the liturgy and the sacraments what Dante wrote about, that we embark onto a sea. Okay, this image of the sea again, that's formed both by nature and the hand of God. And so I hope these maybe a little bit dense. So I think that the consideration of looking what we do day to day, okay, and the senses and how it can enliven, how we can begin to open our minds and hearts and imagination to be able to bring what we experience here into our own homes, into our workplaces, into our communities, into our parish, to help us be able to be open and to encounter Jesus in the Eucharist. Thank you.